Good morning, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of NGO CSW New York, I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's book talk with Yeva Avakyán and our conversation on her chapter, Introduction, Gender and Development at a Crossroads, from the book Gender Mainstreaming and Other Development Fantasies. I would like to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to the Bahá'í International Community for their partnership with NGO CSW and convening this important series. This is the first of the events in this series. We are grateful for your fostering dialogue that advances equality, justice, and the dignity of all people. Yeva's chapter arrives at a particularly important moment for the field of gender and development as the global community confronts persistent inequalities, conflict, economic uncertainty, climate crises, and resistance to gender equality. The question before us is not simply how to improve existing systems, but whether those systems require transformation. Drawing from the rich tradition of radical feminist scholarship, and engaging deeply with post-colonial intersectional analysis, Yeva invites us to examine how power operates through institutions, policies, and development frameworks. Her work challenges us to move beyond technical approaches to gender mainstreaming and towards a vision centered on structural transformation, collective liberation, and justice for those who have too often remained at the margins of decision making. This promises to be a thoughtful and timely discussion, and we are greatly honored to have Yeva with us to help us navigate these important questions. I now turn the mic over to my co-chair, Rosa Lizardi.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for those opening words. I really just want to add our appreciation to the Baha'i International Community for kicking us off in this series, Talk to Me, and to be able to hold this type of space, which is so important in today's events, in what's happening today at the UN. So much reform, so much change, and so much pushback on gender equality. It's important for us to come together in this virtual table and talk and decipher and discern and discuss all of these issues that are propelling us to take courage, to take all this information and really transform our work, energize our work, and revitalize our work. And so I just want to limit some of my remarks right now, and I will come in more at the end with more remarks. But much appreciation to Lily, who is also a member of our executive committee, and to Yeva. Thank you so much. So over to Lily. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pamela and Rosa, for these warm, welcoming remarks and for the partnership. I think it's really wonderful to partner with NGO CSW to have these substantive conversations during the summertime, in between these in between months when the UN is a little bit calmer. So I won't talk on too much. I would really like to give the floor over to Yeva Avakyán, who's joining us. Remotely all the way from Romania, I believe, no? To have this conversation with us. Maybe I'll just briefly read Yeva's bio before turning over the floor to hear more about the work that Yeva's doing. So Yeva Avakyán is a feminist leader with over 2 decades working internationally to advance gender equality and social justice. She has led transformational change across major humanitarian and development organizations, shaping strategy, building expertise networks, and expanding program portfolios focused on women's and girls' leadership, LGBTQI+ justice, child rights, and gender-based violence. Beginning her career at Armenia's first domestic violence response center, she brings a deep commitment to evidence-driven social change. She's a co-author of Gender and Development, Perspectives from Australia and the Pacific, Her chapter, Gender Mainstreaming and Other Development Fantasies, which we'll be discussing today, critiques the developmentization and technocratization of the field and argues for a return to feminist organizing rooted in collective action and structural change. Yeva serves on the boards of the National Foundation for Australian Women, the Domestic Violence Crisis Service in Canberra, and the Caucasus Resource Center in Armenia. An Armenian American, she divides her time between Canberra and Yerevan. The floor is yours, Yeva. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you so much to NGO CSW in New York and the Bahá'í International Community for hosting this series. It's great to see familiar faces, and I really look forward to the conversation. It really means a lot to talk about the work that's been so close to my heart. And let me start with where the chapter came from, because it didn't come from a very comfortable place. As all of you know, about a year ago, cuts to US Foreign End upended many of our careers. I was serving as the head of gender equality and social justice at Save the Children in the US at the time, and sort of upended our careers, organizations, and the work that so many of us have given our lives to. So, and for those of us who are working on human rights, gender equality, social justice, it really felt like the ground beneath the entire field shifted overnight. So in the months that followed, I wrote this chapter alongside former colleagues and people who I've worked beside for years. And honestly, writing together became a kind of a catharsis and a way to process out loud, to make sense of lives we had given to this work and to ask harder questions that we'd let ourselves ask while we were still inside the machine. The chapter is called Gender Mainstreaming and Other Development Fantasies. And yes, it is kind of meant to unsettle. It's supposed to land a little uncomfortably because the argument underneath is also uncomfortable. And also it comes from a place of from a group of practitioners who spent decades doing this work within large international institutions. So it's not so much of a critique, but more of a reflection on how far we've come. And so here's the argument, and trying to put it as plainly as possible, in that over the last few decades, we built an enormous apparatus to advance gender equality inside development. So we have frameworks, markers, scorecards, gender analysis, indicators, and a lot of it we know has worked on their own terms. So we saw that gender equality became more visible, it became more measurable, more fundable, but as it pains to say, it at the heart of it became less transformative. It became less political, and we made gender justice legible to bureaucracies in which we were operating. And in making it legible, we have drained it of one thing that gave it power, the analysis of power that it did. And so I'll give you an example from the book that many of you as practitioners will recognize in your own bones probably, and the use of the tool of gender equality marker that many of you have probably used, and it's a marker that scores how well a program integrates gender across different functions. And so when we at Save the Children made it a global performance indicator, it was hailed as a watershed moment. We were celebrating it as a leadership commitment at a very high level. And at first, it did something genuinely useful. It got people thinking about gender from the very start of designing program. It brought gender advisors into that process. But over time, that question kind of very quietly changed. And so it went from how does this program challenge gender inequality to how do we secure a passing score on this program? And so we've kind of created a nickname for this indicator. We called it a watermelon indicator, which was green on the outside and the red on the inside. So it looked really great on paper to donors and leadership. But inside the programs often had lacked real political ambition. And so that's kind of the fantasy in the title. So not that the work is fake or the people doing it are some of the most committed people I know, some of the most passionate and brilliant feminists, but that the tools could only carry that feminist transformation so far. And so Audre Lorde warned us, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so the question was, so what do we do with that? And our answer was not to throw everyone working inside institution. I was one of them, many of you are, and we need as many feminists as we possibly want inside large, institutions. But it's to be honest about the limits of those tools and put the power back at the center of the conversation. And so in this discussion, I really would love to get into the how, and I'd love to hear your experiences and reflections as well. Some of the ways in which we thought from our experiences it was really important to do is really starting to fund feminist movements directly, not only sort of treating that solidarity and what Latin American feminists called acompañamiento, right? Accompaniment, that walking alongside one another is not a sort of nice to have thing. It is the actual method in itself. And then stop pretending that neutrality or being neutral really protects us, because in this political moment, we all know it doesn't. And so I'll kind of close. I'll be a little brief, and would love to start with the conversation with you all about. I'll close where the chapter itself closes, in that despite all of it, the cuts, the backlash, the exhaustion, I am genuinely hopeful, because if you look at the evidence, feminist movements are the single most effective force we have ever had for lasting change. It's not national wealth. It's not number of women in parliament. It's feminist organizing. It's what won legal abortion rights in Argentina. It's what defended women's rights, land rights in Kenya. It's the thing that again and again actually has moved the world. And so when even if the title says development fantasies, this chapter isn't really cynical. It's more of a call to turn that power back on. So yeah, I will keep it very brief, just sort of opening remarks, but I'd love to hear your reflections, your experiences, and kind of, yeah, love to have the discussion about it. So thank you. Over to you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Yeva, and for also the very kind of honest exploration of what gave rise to the chapter, like the difficult moments, and how often in difficulties also when slivers of light come in, through dark times. So I really appreciate kind of that honesty and that frankness. So just for those who are joining us, my plan is to, and as Yeva mentioned, it would be really helpful to hear from you as well. So maybe we can have questions from you if you want to share your reflections and questions that you might have for Yeva. I have a long list of questions that I've developed, that I've already shared, but it doesn't have to be just me and Yeva speaking. It could, and I think it's nice to have like an intimate group that we can actually speak to one another. So I just open the floor if you would like to come in and share some thoughts. If perhaps what was shared by the coaches in the opening, what was shared by Yeva resonated with you and how you're reading the atmosphere and the very challenging environment that women's rights organizations, gender equality organizations, advocates are functioning in. And of course, if you also have a question that you'd like to pose, feel free. I will also look at the chat if you feel more comfortable to type up a question, put it there. I will note it and read it out loud if you're not able to come in. If you're not able to speak, I'm also happy to read out your question. So feel free. You can use the raise hand function if you like. If you want to do it that way, Maz, I don't know if that'd be easier. Can people just kind of open the mic and come in as they like? Yeah. So feel free to open the mic and come in, please. Please, Rosa.
Well, people warm up to asking questions. Thank you very much for that, Yeva. That really resonated with me. I just want to throw out some questions, and you don't have to answer, right now. When maybe we can collect some more questions. But I think that that whole defunding of programs really hit hard, not only within the feminist movement, but the whole development sector, let's say, and care for the planet, and I think that you're saying that really triggered a lot for you and your small group of thinkers. And maybe I just want to delve a little bit more into that, because some of the things you said about being honest and putting the power back at the center of the work. I'd love for you to expand on that, and what you mean about funding the movement directly, because I think that that's something that we contend with a lot. We need to fund, and we keep saying it. I know you were at Women Deliver, so was I. I didn't get to meet you, but there was so much talk there about funding the movement, funding women's organizations, funding grassroots, funding Pacific Islander women and Indigenous and Aboriginal. And that's been said over and over and over and over again. So I'd love to just kind of get your input on some of these points, just to kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa. And I think the suggestion to maybe take a couple of questions and comments would be helpful. So I don't know if somebody else would like to come in also before we turn the floor back to Yeva. Please, Huri. Lovely to see you. Welcome.
I really wanted to jump in much later on because I'm so excited to be hearing from Yeva as well. We do go way back a little bit, but I'm actually coming from a point of like really being an observant these days, because I'm not technically as involved, but I have so many close friends that I follow and I speak to, and I'm so curious about this moment and the thoughts and ideas that are coming out from people like Yeva and so many others gives me some hope. And thank you, Yeva, for saying that you're not hopeless, because there were times in the last couple of years where we all felt hopeless, right? With the elections in the US and the way the world is shifting and the rejection of any kind of human rights violations that we just keep proving and yet not getting any results on. And I've obviously loved. I actually haven't read the chapter yet. I'm sorry, but I will. Now I'm like really inspired to read it. But I'm so excited because the only way I think we're going to shift, and I'm putting this on the table and we can unpack it and discuss it later, is to really shift with the way we approach the work we do. I know we've been saying this, and Rosa's right. Some of the language we're using right now is so repetitive as well. Like we've been saying this, fund feminists directly, or, shift the narrative. And Generation Equality Forum was one of them. And we only just went so far. It was like not even close to what we were imagining. So what I'd like to really hear, especially from young activists and women and in all their diversities that are really coming in fresh and looking, because I remember 15, 20 years ago when I first came in, I was like, is this how you guys do things? Let's change it up a little bit. So that I'm expecting a lot of young people to come in and say, all due respect, that's cool, but let's change things up. But what is it and how? And of course, it has to be extremely creative because, like you said, the master's tools are not gonna, like, we come into this patriarchy and we mimic the patriarchy, and we're not gonna win for what we want in that realm. So thank you for having me here too. And yeah, I can't wait to dig into the discussion.
Maybe before, thank you so much, Rory. Maybe before I turn the floor back over to Yeva, if I could, there's one particular paragraph in the chapter that I've read. I mean, I've like marked it up and it's all highlighted now. But there's one that I really enjoyed, because I think it really describes the moment and some of the ideas that have already been expressed. And I was going to follow up with a question before turning over to you. If I could just, I'll read it because I think the words that you use are much better than those I could find. This is talking about kind of the question of transformation that has to happen within programs, but also personally. Furthermore, these tools rarely allow for the deeply personal and collective journeys that feminist transformation requires. Liberation is not a deliverable, it is a process. It demands discomfort, which you mentioned earlier, reflection, courage, and mutual accountability. It requires what Latin American feminists called acompañamiento, walking alongside others in the struggle for justice, emphasizing solidarity and collective care. And it goes on about how this process is not linear, it's relational, so on. So turning the floor over to you, maybe to talk about like this shift that you spoke about, how it has drifted from its political roots. It would be really helpful to hear what do you see as the most important, what are the most important ways that drift has occurred? In addition to the question that Rosa shared about, like we've heard, these kind of calls for funding for a long time, directly funding these movements, these movements that are committed to this level of transformation that's required for societies to move forward, and of course also the question that Hui posed about, it seems that we've been waiting for this shift for a long time, yet the movement has drifted from its original purpose. So, three big questions, but it would be lovely to hear from you, Yeva.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Huri, so wonderful to see you. Yeah, so this is kind of building on this experiment that we conducted at Save the Children a few years ago when I first started, and we and Lily, this is speaking to the piece that you read about the accompaniment, and because I didn't look at, I wanted to try and move away from looking at sort of gender advisors as sort of technicians or like having this technical fixes, because organization was large, there was very few of us. And so we were also there at a interesting moment for Me Too, Black Lives Matter, that was sort of at a time when what we were doing in our programs was not enough. There needed to be a sort of organizational transformation that accompanied that work. And our experiment was creating a gender equality hub where we had folks from different departments, from HR to operations to different technical folks, who'd helped create an agency-wide strategy that looked at different parts of the organization. And the piece and the philosophy behind it was that, I can't be talking about empowering girls in, I don't know, Bangladesh if I have a gender pay gap at home. I can't be talking about men being engaged in caregiving in Nepal if our men are not taking fathers not taking parental leave, so um so I think it was how do we make that connection between personal and political, and we all know we're not technicians, we are political actors working within organizations that are treating us as technicians. So that tension is always there. And so for us, it's always been, both for me, and that's something I try to always instill in my team, is that what we do matters, but how we do it is equally, if not more important. And so that accompaniment piece is like, it is the method in which you engage with this work as a feminist. Joy, you engage with joy, with kindness, with commitment to justice, and the work that we're doing isn't, again, it's not just external. It is touching us on every part of our lives. I mean, an example, I remember when I first joined, I remember signing up for benefits, and it was easier for me to sign up benefits for my partner who we were not married, but it was harder for my colleague who was in a same-sex relationship, marriage, to sign up for benefits. And you start thinking about, like, well, no one has embedded this inequality on purpose. That's the system, what it is. The system is created as by default is created unequal. And our role is to examine the system, examine the power imbalance and within the systems, and make that invisible visible. So I think and the work that we've done through sort of creating mentorship for groups, creating that accompaniment model, sort of really created something really beautiful, created relationship that carried us through a lot of those, and continue to carry us through, to carry the sort of feminist principles and the ideals and dreams into broader world, beyond what we have now seen. So that's really important. In terms of the funding feminist movements, I think, and I agree, Huri, like, language is so repetitive. We've been saying this for, I don't know, decades, like, oh, we need to fund the feminist movements. And some of the, key conversations from Women Deliver, that, conversations were about, where is the money actually going? Continuous persistent critique that funding for gender and SRHR, even if it exists, it is still concentrated in large NGOs. It's still heavily earmarked. It's still tied to kind of measurable short-term results. There was also some tension around rhetoric of, like, shifting power versus donor compliance system. I think we're starting to learn from that through some of those smaller feminist funds that have committed to be providing sort of no strings attached funding, but those are very few. All right. We've we've seen that local feminist groups often noted that they are, like, expected to be implementers, not decision makers. We've also seen the kind of a youth funding gap, where we have very high visibility at conferences, but low structural sort of engagement anywhere else. They're showcased, but very underfunded. And then around measurement as well. I mean, how many times have I had to prove that the work that I'm doing has measurable benefits, economic benefits? Like, what is the reports that we've all seen about benefits to the economy of addressing GBV or addressing child marriage or addressing all of that? Yeah, that's great, but, like, how do we bring in the human rights lens to that as well. So the critique of kind of that log frame metrics approach that rewards very easily identifiable, quantifiable output, but not the political or cultural change. And then I think also, I'll just throw it out there, like, who gets to be feminist in this funding system as well? NGOs and organizations who adopt feminist language for funding access or retracted for funding access. And then dilution of political feminism into kind of technical gender programming. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different models there, you know, Mama Cash and others that are, I can't remember right now, but some smaller funders that are continuing to provide those funding, unrestricted funding to small local grassroots organization, but the need outpaces the existing commitment. So yeah, that's kind of my reflection. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yeva. And I think we could probably have like a whole other like day-long conversation about this whole kind of funding models and how that system has to change also to reflect feminist values. Yeah, so I see Pamela has raised her hand, and we'll give the floor to Pamela for just a second. But I wonder, and maybe for those who are in the chat, who are in the group also, and feel free to also use the chat as you like, kind of there seems to be, I don't know if counterintuitive is the word, or kind of opposing agendas with the question of funding. And I'm posing this question out there because it's maybe one worth considering, that because gender has kind of become this gender equality has in a way become like an industry sometimes, right? Like this professionalization of NGOs. But then at the same time, these NGOs asking large corporations to fund the very movements that undermine the principles that the corporations have built on. And I don't know that there's a question there, but I think there is something there to consider, and what that means in terms of self-funding, self-organizing, and what that means in terms of working at the grassroots in a way that doesn't depend on industries that maybe whose interests are not best served by the survival of those organizations. Just something for us to think about. So the floor is over to you, Pamela, for your question.
Thank you. Lily, that question is so compelling. Perhaps she would want to answer that before moving to my question, because I think that has a lot of weight. So I'll wait until she responds, with your permission.
Sure. Yeah. No. Those of you who have been who have seen the evolution of Women Deliver can probably see how that corporate influence on human rights, gender, women's rights sort of space has kind of evolved in the past decade. And I was really encouraged to see, I think the first one that I went to, this was my fourth Women Deliver conference. The first one I went to, I was just appalled to see how corporates were actually setting the human rights agenda, and the presence of a lot of the corporate pharmaceutical and other organizations. That, not to say that they're not doing a lot of great working to fund a lot of interesting work, but it's not. But as long as it's not disruptive to the work. I remember we did kind of an analysis about 8 years ago. We did an analysis of funding for gender equality for US funders. And most of the funding, we couldn't find one corporate, with the exception of one small cosmetics brand, that funded violence against women work, gender-based violence. all of the stuff that was funded was around women's empowerment. So no brand wanted association with yucky stuff like GBV or child marriage and stuff like that. They wanted and so and that with that we've seen this proliferation of sort of women's economic empowerment, girls' economic empowerment language that has I think World Bank has led on it, and others, but looking at sort of almost commodification of women for the purpose of the economy. And so, yeah, it's there. I mean, there's a really great book called Winner Takes All. I can't remember the name of the author, but it really talks about the corporate philanthropy. So it's really interesting. If you can get that author to speak, that'd be a really interesting discussion about corporate philanthropy in general. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I represent Zonta International at the UN, and one of our focal areas is challenge. So when I read the section on smart economics, girl boss, the hollowing of empowerment, and I look at the one phrase, while ignoring the broader socio-political conditions that produce and sustain inequality. And I think that Putin's research that really changed the way that child marriage was and you talk about the economic framing to calculate the cost of gender equality. So can you expand on that to help our audience better understand this whole shift? And although it looked like it was done from a human rights perspective, it really had a, a foundation that was much different.
Yeah, I mean, who here has not made an economic case for something? I have done it many times. Hey, if we get another gender advisor on board, we'll get more funding from U.S. government or whatever. Like we've all, made those tactical kind of change. I'll speak for myself. I have done that, those tactical pieces, but I think this is the shift is from the just to it's smart, and it is troubling because when the World Bank sort of branded their gender equality as the right and smart things to do, and we started coasting inequality, child marriage costs trillions, not educating girls costs, trillions in lost productivity. I feel like we've made some kind of like a quiet trade. We made women women's worth contingent on their economic return, right? And so, and that danger is obvious in that if the business case can be made, it also, as we have seen, can be unmade very, very quickly. And so if investing in women ever stops paying, depending on who's defining that, then commitment evaporates. And because we never really grounded in rights. So is there ever a place for it? I mean, tactically, yes. I've watched colleagues find positions by showing how much money they would lose without not having a gender role, right? Or we've sort of shown that proposers that score transformative on the gender scale are more likely to get funded. So it's kind of like a strategic subversion, and it's real and it's possible, but we need to treat that as more of a door opener rather than the foundation for our work. And then on kind of altruism, I would be careful there too, because appealing to altruism still casts women as objects of someone's benevolence, right? Like, or, without who are recipients of generosity rather they're holders of their rights of their own, right? So be kind to women, or it pays. I mean, it's justice. But I think the strongest counter argument it's about is justice, and is backed by evidence, right? So women have a right to safety and self-determination, full stop. And kind of historical record does show that feminist movements deliver change. So I think lead with the rights, back it with evidence, and then using the economic case to get in the door. So that would be my that's from my experience, that's how I would approach it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking to that. And it's actually one of the questions, as you know, that I had wanted to ask is there a danger into wading into the moral question of it? Is that something that you would caution against?
I mean, I think there is a place for that, but it also kind of minimizes the groups that you're talking about as someone who needs the benevolence from someone else, rather than looking at it from a human rights framework. And so that's why I think it's important to like lead with the rights, but also back it with strong evidence which exists, right? And so and I mean, depending on the situation, use any of the above to get in the door. But I think there is a real danger to continue to use the moral argument, or continue to use kind of either not the rights argument, but because who will then decide? Look at the tradwife movement, who are deciding that this is good for women, and so if we're drifting away from the kind of human rights equality under law for human rights framework, the moral arguments are not going to sustain us for a long time. But I would use everything and anything you can, but just also knowing that you can use these cases to get in the door, but you can never like furnish or build a house with those arguments, right? Like you still need to do the political work inside once you're there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yeva. All right. Do we have other questions from the floor? I'm a very patient person, and I'm willing to weigh you out because I think it's wonderful to hear from you all. Please, Gail, over to you.
Hello, Gail James here. I'm calling in from Kansas City, the center's here. But you've alluded to accompaniment and solidarity. My question has to do with the despair I see, the lack of solidarity, and the sort of psycho-personal, psycho-emotional lack of connection among feminists and advocates. It's more than just being in silos. And so I'm wondering how you can help us get past that or address it and move on.
Thank you so much for your question, Gail. And I think I see it's resonating also with others in the group. Can we take maybe one or two more before? Please, Janat, over to you.
Yes, I was wondering, in light of what's happening with Bill Gates' affiliation with Jeffrey Epstein and Melinda Gates, separating herself from all of this, would we consider maybe people like Melinda Gates or people like that can help us on this side? That's my question. I mean, is it ethical or is it moral? I mean, it's a part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for raising. I think maybe we turn it over to you, Yeva, because those two are big questions. And then I'll, Mark, I see your hand. I'll come back to you after that.
Oof, yes, big questions. I think the moral question of where we take the money to do the work, I think it's a question that individuals and organizations kind of need to grapple with. But in terms of lack of solidarity among feminists, I think that perceived lack of it is easier to understand when we place it in the context of anti-gender movements, because these movements are kind of actually very actively reshaping the space on which feminist organizing happens. And rather than kind of operating in a very stable field, I feel like feminist movements are increasingly responding to coordinated backlash that not only targets specific rights, but also the legitimacy of kind of gender equality feminism itself. And the difference is that a lot of the anti-gender movement, we should learn from them, because you have very unlikely bedfellows from, from TERFs, feminists, to, Russian Orthodox Church and American evangelical, groups. There is a strong alliance between, they have nothing in common except being aligned on sort of one thing. And so how do we, as a feminist movement, and it's a hard question, how do we um where's that line where we can say, right, we're gonna be able to align on this and against this broader machine? Yeah, and I think it's a really wicked question. It's something that we need to grapple with. I think also in the same time, those movements are this anti-gender mobilization kind of intensified the pressure on feminist organization or feminist movements to become more legible, fundable, responsible in donor terms, but it also pushes us in very institutionalized forms of advocacy that are easier to defend, but they're also less able to sustain more like deeper coalition building. So it's kind of a double bind. Feminist movements, we're expected to sort of represent unity, coherence, but the environment is also incentivizes more of like that cautious approach. And so I think in this sense, what appears to be a weakened solidarity is perhaps partially an effect of this strategic adaptation that is to a field that is shaped by very organized opposition rather than like just simple absence of alignment. So it's a very complex question, but I think there's a lot that as feminist movements, feminists, we need to learn from the existing very coordinated movement.
Thank you so much, Yeva, for taking those two questions on. And I think, yeah, this idea of I keep coming back to this idea of accompaniment that you shared, because I think that is required to be able to parse through some of the complexities that are arising in the movement. So I see Mark and then Pamela. Over to you, Mark.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to the speakers and everyone. The discussion I've really appreciated just the depth of thought and analysis that's been here. So I have a question on kind of the role of men and boys, which feels very stereotypical and identity-based, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just to have it be out there. So yeah, just kind of curious on any comments or thoughts on kind of what are the roles that maybe men and boys can or need to be playing in building a more gender equal world? And then also maybe like, are there pitfalls or lessons that have been learned from past efforts, and kind of what are the ways that men and boys are approached or included in work of this kind? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mark, for raising that question. Should we hear from Pamela and then turn it back over to Yeva?
Mark, great question. We always need to know that. Yeva, I'm a child of the 60s. So reading a lot of this takes me back decades. And the section from empowerment to liberation also resonate with me. And can you, for our audience, talk about that a bit? Empowerment versus liberation, and what is it that we're really looking for as a women's movement?
Perfect. I also wanted to ask that question, so this works out very well. Please, over to you, Yeva.
Excellent. Thank you. No, the great questions. Thanks so much. Pamela, to your question, and I'm the child of 70s, but having been born in the Soviet Union, I had a very different experience to feminism. There's just a new book that came out that I loved, so resonated with me, called Motherland, about feminist Russia and Soviet Union. So I highly recommend her book. But I think the distinction between empowerment is liberation is kind of, I think, the spine of the chapter. So I'm glad you asked. So, empowerment, the way the sector uses it now I feel like it's been hollowed out. It's become very personal. So speak up, dream big, lean in, build your confidence, polish your pitch, and what we see, the message underneath is, change the woman, not the system, right? And so, and liberation is the opposite of that. It is systemic. It is when economic, social, political structures that are around you, they're actually arranged in a way that you have power for decision making that shapes your life, right? And so, so that institutions stop reproducing inequality in the first place. And I think liberation is both the what and how as well. And so the what is the justice, the what is shared power, and how is that relational piece, Lily, that spoke to you, is how solidarity, mutual accountability, collective care, like how do we create that world around us where we practice those principles? I mean, in my interviews, when I interviewed people for the team, we always ask values questions. What are your 3 key values that drives your work and life? And it's kind of an odd question to ask for a job interview, but it was really important for us as a team to reflect those values, that feminist values. And so why this whole empowerment liberation? Why does it matter? Because if you just, let's look at a context of empowering girls, that we, train girls, empowering them, and then sending them into a system without any structures untouched, you can produce very confident, capable girls inside an unchanged, unjust, quite violent world. And then you're handing the burden of the problem to the girl that was kind of never hers to fix. And so, like, putting the onus of the problem on individuals rather than looking at it as a systemic solution. So yeah, I think empowerment asks the girl, the woman, to rise, where liberation changes what she's rising into. Yeah. On the question of men and boys, I mean, this, we gender, I think that across, when we're talking with Women Deliver, a lot of the pro-engagement case was pragmatic rather than ideological. Gender inequality, transformation requires changing masculinity is not only empowering, liberating women. So, if we want to ever address gender-based violence against women, we need to be looking at working with men and boys, men who are perpetrators of violence, who perpetrate violence against women, men, other men, boys and children. So, so it's incredibly important. I think some of the controversies that I've seen is around recurring critique around recentering men as solution or depoliticizing some of the structural power issues, that funding and visibility sometimes shift towards male-focused programming because it seems as more politically palatable. And then also we've talked about, we've seen the feminist organizations seem to note that sometimes this can unintentionally reproduce the idea that men are primary agents of change. So for me, I think that something that I've always tried to change is rather focusing on groups and individual and groups. So like, we're working with marginalized group, we're working with men, boys, instead of talking at groups, thinking of shifting into systems of power, patriarchy, classism, sexism, this, ableism, etc., rather than looking at people with disabilities, men and boys, girls, LGBT people. Like, how do we, instead of locating the issues within those groups who are quote unquote marginalized, oppressed, etc., let's step back and look at the systems of inequality and how those systems of patriarchy, of sexism, of ableism, of heteronormativity are intersecting in ways that make our lives very challenging. And so I've always tried to move away from kind of focus on groups and individuals to let's look at the system and how it how do we challenge the system rather than looking at individuals and groups. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's kind of
It's very helpful, and I think that's also something that we learned from Bell Hooks, and she describes it so well in feminist theory, that especially working with individuals or people that we may not agree with, we may not see eye to eye on, just this idea of not being harsh on people, but we look at the systems in which we're operating in, and we investigate those, and how that actually changes our lens in the way that we're approaching the work. Because as you pointed out, like if we're actually seeking the type of like deep transformation that we're seeking, that requires the contributions of every single person. We cannot do it alone. And I think we're starting to learn this lesson.
Contribution and transformation.
Yes. Yeah, the personal and the systemic. Yeah. Do we have others who would like to come in and ask a question or make a comment, please, so that we can continue to have this conversation? We have about 10 minutes left together to hear from the floor before we move into closing. I can also ask one of my own. Please, Ori, come in.
Yeah, it's like there's so much, and I'm like trying to organize it in my head. This is so inspiring, so moving, and thank you, Pam, Rosa, Lily, NGO CSW team. Like, you guys rock for really bringing us together, because with everything going on in the world, it's like if we're not having these conversations to try to build on something that there's always hope, right? Again, I don't want to keep repeating, but one of the things I was going to say is that we know historically that when we shift so far right or left or whatever you want to call it, there's always some kind of a balance. We come back to it. And one of the things that's giving me hope now, and this includes the men and boy question too, because I'm seeing that, is when in our last election, it was so disappointing to see so many youth members and minority committees that just thought, oh, this might be a good idea, voting for Trump. I mean, I'll just say it, I don't care. But I think with what we're seeing in New York City, and you can agree, disagree, you can discuss whatever the leadership of our mayor, Mamdani is, but the bottom line is that what I love about it is the way things are being done differently, right? Like just we've got to change the normative, like the way we vote, the way we elect, the way we even campaign, and my hope is that is, again, you just hold on to anything that's like, again, because it applies to the system change. The system needs to change. The way we run our countries, the way we elect our leadership, the way we even talk to each other about it. I think, Eva, at some point you said it, I didn't write it. I wanted to write so many things, but I was like, oh, I'm missing the next. That it really is like, we can't just dismiss the discussion, but how do we have a discussion with the other extreme who doesn't even recognize, like, how do we build on that? And I feel like watching Mamdani, I'm watching him so closely to just see how is it that he's doing it, because he's in a lot of trouble in some ways, especially with the Gaza and the Palestinian issue. But how do you walk around issues like this? Again, I know this, I'm going off the topic of gender and all of that, but to me, it's all interconnected. It's all related. It's obviously, and I'm just seeing Janet's name now, when when she talked about Bill Gates, you know, I don't think every man that had anything to do with Epstein can be just wiped out of this world. No, because they were part of a system that is how it worked. That was the system, and it doesn't mean we have to accept it or agree with it. They were looking at it as fundraisers. Okay, now I'm going all over the place, but I'm trying to make the connection with all of it. Is like, how do we really continue this conversation and and celebrate the gains to build on, right? There are some gains out there, including in the gender world, like the gender equality world. And I know, Yeva, you're connected to so many more globally. Like, please give us some hope on things that are happening out there. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Uri. And I know, like, it's also unrelated but very related topic. Currently working with Kamran, who's here as one of our interns at the BIC, and try to make a mind map of the various ideas that we want to keep in mind, but also to write about as we are thinking about CSW 71, where we're thinking about our statement. And it's immense. Like, all these ideas and questions are all related, and how to contend with them in ongoing conversation with each other is important, and also unwieldy and complicated and hard. But I think it's important to be able to outline the connections that exist between all these systems that we're operating in. I do want to just bracket off some time. We have Mads, Mutia, Kamran, some of our participants who are younger, just trying to make space to see if you have any questions as we get to the end of our conversation. If you have comments that you would like to make or questions you'd like to pose before I hand the floor over back to Yeva. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot. And maybe in the meantime, I can ask one logistical question that was put in the chat, which is about access to the chapter. We can put a link to the book in the chat. Maybe that's one option. I don't know if you want to share anything else about access to the chapter.
I'm happy for you, Lily, to share the chapter with this group. I
Perfect.
can't share the whole book, unfortunately.
No, yeah.
Okay, but whatever. But yeah, no, chapter, feel free to share it around. That's fine. Yeah.
Maybe what people can do is I think we have the emails from registration. I don't know if we can get the emails of the friends who are here, Mads, if that's possible. And then what I can do is I can send the email and attach it that way. Perfect, perfect. I see you turned on your camera, Kamran. Did you want to come in and ask a question?
I don't have anything in particular, also because I joined late and I don't want to re-ask a question that was already asked. But I did have the chance to read the chapter and I thought it was really interesting. So and I appreciate the discussion.
Yeah. And Cameron is being humble and helped a lot with putting together the conversation and putting together the questions. So we appreciate it. Maybe I could just think about like we've talked a lot about gender ideology, and a lot of us are within organizations, NGOs, maybe ones that we've started ourselves or larger organizations. And I don't know if maybe it would be good to hear just how this question of empowerment, liberation, the various approaches that we sometimes see organizationally. I don't know, Yeva, you might be able to point to some guidelines about how to approach maybe sometimes these opposing approaches that we see sometimes organizationally as we're doing our work. We might also see it in larger organizations like the UN, right? Like when you were describing like sometimes these like checkbox exercises, you can sometimes see a very much unclear display, but it's also being done by individuals who are clearly committed to the work. So I don't know, like in terms of navigating that, I think you've already shared quite a bit, but if there's any more you'd like to share about that. And then similar to the question that Huri asked about hope, like the chapter ends on this very hopeful note about feminist organizing and collective action. And maybe and I think after having experienced something that was so shocking, like the whole community of gender advocates was shaken, I think, by the dissolution of USAID and everything else that followed. Why was it important to end on that note? I think maybe it's an obvious question, but I think it's also helpful to like articulate it before we go into the closing. So, Yeva.
Yeah, thank you. I want to start with kind of maybe a reframe because this we don't have a gender ideology, right? That's term is the invention to designed to make equality look like some kind of indoctrination. So how do we respond to that anti-gender backlash and in a space where we have technocratized, I've used that word a lot, now I can say it correctly, at the gender equality and depoliticized it completely. And so when we are under attack, and yes, as you said, it was a huge shock, the instinct is sort of to go quiet, right? To drop the word, which many of us have, gender, feminist, intersectionality, but I mean, neutrality isn't really a shield, right? Like it's more of a position. So and so how do we do that within large organizations like UN, etc., where we know retreat doesn't really protect programs because it rather emboldens the people that are attacking them. And I remember one of the last things I was asked to do, and I just be very honest with you here. I remember like I spent 7 years building out the gender equality, social justice practice within the organization. And overnight we went from 380 people to 30, right? And so one of the last things I was working on is to kind of how do we tone down the language and use other words to describe what we're doing. And that was really tough because you spend like a decade of your life building that out, and it's overnight. That's kind of how do we did that protect our programs? No, everything got cut anyway, right? But what it did, it emboldened the people who were attacked us. So And I want to be fair to every one of us who have had to make those impossible calls within our programs. And I mean, there's a real defensible space for that tactical discretion. And in some contexts, a degree of that care has kept justice-focused program running. I mean, we've done some work very carefully on LGBT issues in Uganda, or like on gender issues in Afghanistan, or like you need to be an understanding of this, and now in the US. So the honest question isn't like whether we adapt as institutions or individuals. We will, but it's how far and how do we hold that line on the substance versus softening the framing? And so we kind of need to name backlash for what it is. It's anti-democratic, right? It's need to protect our staff who are in the line of fire. And then how do we, as institutions, continue to stay in solidarity with the movements that are facing that repression instead of abandoning? So I think you can be smart about your words without being silent about your commitment to justice. And yeah, adapt the language, but I guess never concede the principle. So it's easier to say than to. And then in terms of why the chapter ends on hope, I mean, I think for all of us, it's easy to be angry, feel defeated. Last year certainly gave us many reasons to do that. I mean, to me, the hope is not a mood or a decision. It's kind of a reading of the evidence, because like across every context, there's a study that was done across 60 contexts over 40 years. Weldon and Tatum's work, and particularly the thing that actually secured lasting change wasn't related to national wealth, even women's representation in parliament. It was related to presence of feminist movements on the ground. I've referenced that study in the chapter, so that it was really worth going and looking at it. And so these are not kind of exceptions. That seems to be the partner. For progressive legislation on gender equality, you need to have feminist movements on the ground that are able to push on change. And so, and as I was writing that chapter, I was also convened a symposium at the Australian National University in Canberra, where I live. And we produced what we call a feminist manifesto that the line that's kind of will stay with me is that this is like the feminist dream is not a utopia, that it's a future that we're already building, right? It's through struggle, through imagination, through hope, through joy. And in that sense, I think feminist organizing, and each one of you can do that in, building on that accompanimento principle. How do you build that how do we build that in our lives, in our personal lives, in our professional lives? How do we build those core, and we'll work in accompaniment with others for those principles. And so in that sense, feminist organizing isn't a risk that we need to manage. Like, it is a resource, it's a huge resource, and the only thing that really has ever secured lasting change. So I hope it's not a naive optimism. I think it's, if anything, it is the most evidence-based hope that I know. Yeah, and that's why it's kind of the final words in the chapter are it's to turn the power back on. So yeah.
Beautiful. It's I think, yeah, when we focus on like starting from joy, I think also there's a lightness and there's a strength that comes from that in the face of the well-documented, well-articulated challenges that we know that we have to face. But I think somehow operating from that position of, yeah, what you mentioned, that collective care and joy, is a protection in many ways, and allows us to keep on doing the work. Thank you so much. Would Pamela and Rose, I don't know if you would like to come in to share any last thoughts before we finish our time together.
Sure. I mean, I can start, and Pamela, if you want to close. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias. For reminding us of, I mean, really just the complexity of the work that we're in, of the urgency of the situation. I think that's just so important to, bring in the analysis and to bring it into these groups, so that we take it out of those gender development journals, and we make it live. We bring it here to the people who are doing the work. But also, as you were closing, to bring it to hope, because I think it's pushing us, to challenge the system, to create the system that we want, to create the world we want, and also hope. It brings us to a place of action. They say hope is not enough, but it brings us to a place of action, and I think that what you bring, has a ripple effect. It has a ripple effect, to push us into action, to sustain us in this. We at NGO CSW will be closing our office in July. And in a sense, for most of us, just closing our office for a vacation. Vacation, yes. I need to state it in that way. We will be back and running in August. But what I'm saying is that, we need that time also to just, inner recharge, to recharge the system, to gain back that energy. And I think that this type of writing, yes, self-care, this type of writing and reflection is so necessary, because it does bring us strength. It gives us strength. And so thank you so much, Yeva, and Lily, thank you so much as well for kicking us this Talk With Us sessions that we'll be developing during the year. And Yeva, I hope you don't go too far, that we keep you in our NGO CSW family, to really supplement the hard work that we do, and the volunteerism that we give, for this work. So thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much. And you
you.
gave me a fright there for a second. I thought you said you're closing down.
Yes.
But yeah, no, the work that you're doing is so incredible, and a lot of the formative years of my work and have had to do with you and the CSW, NGO CSW. So yeah, thank you for your work, and please do take time to rest. That's so important.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add, I ditto everything Rosa said. I also ditto Kristen, who says, I am unspeakably moved by this discussion, because I sincerely am. Reading your chapter was intellectually invigorating for me. I didn't realize how tired I was until I read your words and how they resonated with me. So, your talk about the systems, your insistence that instead of looking at individuals, we actually continue to look at the systems. We know that patriarchy is implemented by women as much as it is by men. So we have to attack the systems. And thank you for that reminder. The last sentence it is time to turn the power back on. Amen. It is. We know that when you say movements on the ground, we know that you're talking about local implementation. And each of us here has to go into our community and look at how are we going to work with the women around us, the women and men around us, in order to start these shifts, because it is on the ground. So I'm so full. There's so much that I feel about this. I have grandchildren, and this is their future. So we have to work to make sure that this change is incorporated. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Yeva. Thank you, NGO CSW. Hootie is always there for us. We appreciate you. And let's turn it back over to Lily.
Thank you very much, Pamela. I'm loving all the comments that are coming in. And I resonate with what you were saying, Pamela. When I was reading the chapter, I think we kind of all long for having that intellectual grounding, like to make us ask very difficult questions about the work that we're doing, so that we're not unintentionally reproducing the very harms that we're trying to also discard and put away and clear out of the way. So just to another thing, deep gratitude for the work and for the chapter, and I'll be sharing it with all of you who came today. As was mentioned, this is a series speaking with book authors. The next conversation that we're going to be having is with Kimberly Crenshaw. So I hope that you'll all be able to join and invite your colleagues and friends to join. I am both exhilarated and very nervous. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to partner and to speak with all these wonderful thinkers and writers. And I'm looking forward to continue the conversation with all of you. And I've been writing down all the books you've been recommending, Yeva, and maybe at the end of this we'll have like a reading list that we will share with everybody, and to help us to keep us intellectually grounded in our work. So many thanks again. Thank you to Mutia and Mads who got us going and who gave support to this on the technical side. And thank you to all of you for your contributions and to making this a lively discussion and conversation. I hope you all have a lovely day. Please unmute yourself and say goodbye if you like. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Adios.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Gracias.